Hey, what's up? My name's Jake. I had this idea to do 100 days of EDHREC's Commander of the Day. And so today I'm going to get started with what is probably one of the worst commanders that I could have started this on, Temmet, Vizier of Naktamun. Temmet is an Azorious legendary human cleric, and he really does not do much. So at the beginning of each combat on your turn, just one target creature token gets +1/+1 and can't be blocked. When I initially saw this card, my reaction was, okay, of course he cares about tokens because it's Azorious. Azorious is almost always going to be tokens. But when you're playing tokens, you don't really care about one creature getting through. You don't care about one creature being big and unblockable. What does care about that? Equipment. Azorious isn't the best color combo for doing equipment. Really, you'd want like Boros, but it does have white, and so you're at least going to be able to make a passable deck. And so I wanted to start with equipment, and so I put together this list. It took me about half an hour, and I really honed in on what equipment cards can we get that not only pump for the sake of just doing damage, but also are self-sufficient, that are creating the tokens that Temmet wants, because he's got this very specific rule of the target creature token. It can't just be the best equipment holder in the game, which is a legendary creature, just swinging through and killing everyone. So we have to be able to make our own token creatures. So what can do that? If you go to Scryfall and we look at advanced search, let's go to text and let's start by looking at living weapon. Now this is a mechanic that many of these aren't going to work, or a couple of these aren't going to work, but there's 19 cards that have living weapon included as part of their card text. What living weapon does is it creates a 0/0 black Phyrexian germ creature token, and that's what we want to be doing, is creating creature tokens that also the equipment automatically attaches itself to, because what this is going to allow us to do is speed the game up without having to spend a ton of mana to equip these big important equipment cards. So as an example, if we look at, in my pump category, I have Shadow Spear. Shadow Spear is a $30 equipment card that is really, really, really good, but it doesn't equip itself to anything when it enters the battlefield. Granted, it's 1 mana and it costs 2 to equip, so it's kind of inconsequential, but stuff like that does matter for, say, something like Sword of the Animist, where it's 2 mana, 2 to equip. That 1 extra cost is not nothing. So having cards that create the tokens that we're going to be pumping and giving unblockable with Temmet from is going to be huge for this strategy. So we're going to start with living weapon. And what's great about living weapon, and what kind of took me down a rabbit hole, is potentially doing like a toxic Phyrexian build with Temmet, where you're just building a ton of Phyrexians. You have like kind of a Phyrexian matters sub theme within the deck, and then you're using toxic because you're making you're making a creature token that's unblockable. Of course toxic is an idea here, but I think that's kind of bait, because just like with a standard token strategy, Temmet only cares about one creature token becoming unblockable, and with toxic you generally want multiple creatures swinging in, whether they have death touch or whether they can't be blocked for whatever other reason. But oftentimes those aren't creature tokens. I mean, granted, you have like Skrell's Hive, which does make creature tokens, but that's not really what I wanted this deck to do. So I started with living weapon. Living weapons seemed great, especially like Bitterthorn, and this is Animus. This card seemed awesome. And so I'm looking at this like, okay, 19 cards, but really if we look at just white and blue, 15? And 15 just did not seem like it was going to cut it. So what else, maybe from a recent set that involved a decent amount of Phyrexian stuff, what is another mechanic that gives you creature tokens? The answer is 4 Mirrodin. So if you look at this, there are 6 cards that in Azorious colors can be included in the deck. I'm pretty sure I included all of these except for Gold Warden's Helm And then Blade of Shared Souls was my 101. Was card number 101. So I cut this at the last second because it allows you to create a copy of a creature that you control. So basically, you're trying to copy some big like Blightsteel Colossus or something with Blade of Shared Souls, but we don't have that in this deck. So just copying the creature just didn't matter. So it'd be worth including, maybe worth cutting something else for, but I just didn't think it fit that well in this deck. So that's the premise of what I wanted the deck to do. We're going to create creature tokens using Living Weapon and 4 Mirrodin. And then we've got a couple other strategies. So I'm just going to go through this one by one, and we'll go through each category, talk through kind of what my thought process was behind the cards I included, and kind of get to the conclusion of, is this deck even passable? I'm not even going to say it's good. Is it passable? Is it something that like I would recommend anyone pay for and play, or even would I play it myself? So once again, I'm going to start with Temmet, Vizier of Naktamun. So just to make sure that everything is readable, this is what Temmet's ability is. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature token you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. He also has Embalm, which just basically doesn't matter. You don't really care about having Temmet in the graveyard. The only time this might be useful is like if Temmet's like command zone tax, his commander tax goes above this 5 mana cost, so it goes to 6. To be honest, I don't know exactly how commander tax would potentially work with Embalm. I'm pretty sure Embalm foregoes commander tax because it's not in the command zone. But regardless, Embalm is really not that helpful here. But that's what we're working with. He's a 2/2, 2 mana Azorious commander. So I'm just going to start with Pump, because I think that's the most relevant category of what this deck wants to do, is pump stuff up. So, okay, so we're going to start with Flayer Husk. So right off the bat, it's a living weapon. It's a 1 mana, 2 to equip, and just gives +1/+1. What's great about this is that right away we have a target for something like our Sword of the Animist. So this needs a creature. We're probably not putting it on our commander. Flayer Husk on turn 1 allows us to get a target for some of our few swords and just relative equipments that need a body. Mandibular Kite is basically the same thing. What's nice about this is you don't need to have Temmet give his unblockable pump onto Mandibular Kite, because with flying, you kind of just have another attacker. So we're going to be using this card primarily to chip people down. This is so that we have something that we can swing out with as well. With equipment, generally speaking, you're not going super wide in terms of how many things you're attacking with, because you only have so many equipment cards. This just lets us do an extra 1 or 2 damage per turn, and does end up giving us a body that we can potentially throw more stuff on. So Shadow Spear is one of the best equipments probably in Magic, but gives us 2 things. So obviously it's an equipment, but it gives us Trample, so another thing to swing with for stuff I'll talk about a little bit later, where we have big bodies that we can make. And it also gives us Lifelink, so we can kind of prolong how long we're able to stay in the fight. Equipment decks can be a little bit grindy, especially in Azorious. So Shadow Spear just lets us kind of work past that and buy time for ourselves, and also give us a great opportunity down the line to swing in with like our Idle Oblivion's 10/10 Eldrazi token. Ancestral Blade. Again, this isn't a keyword, but it does create a body, and that's what we need. So it's a simple 1/1/1. Makes a human token, a soldier token, and it automatically attaches it. So it does what we want it to do. It's a super basic common, but it's what the deck needs. Batterbone is a living weapon as well. What I love about living weapons specifically is that they have a huge payoff of, they tend to be relatively low mana. So Batterbone is 2. And yes, the equip cost is pretty large, but what if we just never re-equip it? What if we just leave it on a germ and just spam that with the rest of our equipments? It's actually pretty cost effective. Obviously, this gets a little bit tricky once you try to have multiple equipments, living weapons on the field, and you're trying to juggle, like, okay, which one do I want to give Temmet's unblockable? At that point, you're probably min-maxing, but just early on, it's really nice to have low mana costs and you're putting out bodies on the field when this is not a token deck. Like, this is not a go wide token creature deck. Lightning Greaves is protection. I'm putting in the pump category just because it's a little bit easier to kind of manage all of these different categories. Quietus Spike is like one of my favorite cards in this deck because it gives Death Touch. So you can throw this on, that soldier created by Ancestral Blade. You can throw it on some of the tokens that get created by like Thousand Moons Smithy, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And what it does is it basically effectively halves the amount of damage that you have to do in the game. So whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life rounded up. So you can throw this on your Mandibular Kites Phyrexian Germ. You can throw this on, there's another flyer living weapon in the pump category. You can throw this on any other creature token that gets pumped by Temmet's ability. And it just lets you speed up your game because equipment decks over time will just inevitably kind of be focused down because people start to realize, like, ow, you're doing a lot of damage to me. And you're not killing people with commander damage because Temmet can't focus himself. He can't target himself with his ability. So you need a way to speed up the game, and Quietus Spike is one of the, I think, 2 ways this deck can do specifically this. I'll skip straight to what I think is the only other one that does this is a living weapon. So Scythe Claw is a living weapon, gives +1/+1, and then does basically the same thing. It does the exact same thing, actually. So Scythe Claw is nice because, yes, it's 5 mana. It's pretty expensive. Quietus Spike is 6 all in. So it's about the same. Quietus Spike gives Death Touch, so it's a little bit different. But if you've got both on the battlefield, maybe you're hitting 2 people that have 40 life, and you've effectively done 40 damage in 1 turn. That's pretty damn good. So Sickle Slicer is a generic living weapon. It's a 3 mana 2/2, but it gives us that body that living weapon can create. Bone Horde is very similar. The difference being that, in a sense, Bone Horde is a little bit of a win con. So the equipped creature gets +X/+X. Again, this is a living weapon, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards. So potentially you're getting this out, let's say turn 6. Let's say you draw it late. You draw it on like turn 3 or 4, and you're playing it just a little bit later. This could be really effective if you're playing against a bunch of Golgari decks, green-black. If you're playing against really any black deck that cares about the graveyard. So Bone Horde, I'm putting in the pump category because it's a pretty low equip cost. It's only 2. But it's really good as the game goes on and can give you that extra steam you need when your equipment can kind of peter out. So I really like Bone Horde in terms of where I would rank it against the other living weapons. Skin Wing is our other flying living weapon. It's a really expensive card, not in terms of money, but it's a 4 mana and then 6 to equip, so pretty expensive. Batterskull is nice because it gives Vigilance, Lifelink, and then +4/+4. So for 5 mana, you're getting a 4/4 with Vigilance and Lifelink. And that's pretty much guaranteed damage too. Once you put Temmet's ability on it, giving it unblockable. So Batterskull is another better living weapon. I'm not going to say that really any of these living weapon cards have like huge advantages, but just in terms of a body that this provides, it's pretty good. Mirren Bardiche is, I think, our first 4 Mirrodin card on the list that you'll see. Again, it's not doing a ton in terms of the utility the equipment provides. It's just a little bit of extra damage and vigilance, which is always nice, when we're swinging out with a bigger creature. But of course, we're here for the 4 Mirrodin effect, creating our Rebel creature token, which can then be turn unblockable. Scytheclaw I already talked about. Strandwalker. is just a living weapon. It's just here for that ability. 2+2/+4 and reach is not that good, especially for 5 mana, but it is a body and it does give us something to attack with. Necro Pouncer is +3/+1 in haste. So for 6 mana, you're getting a 3/1 with haste. Not that good, but it is a really low re-equip cost, just like Strandwalker, or sorry, just like Batter, just like none of these. There we go. Just like Bonehorde. Just like Bonehorde is only 2. Necropouncer is only 2, so you can get like pretty good pump on a separate creature, and for relatively low mana. And finally, the last card in the pump category is Cauldron Complete. I did not include the Cauldron equipments in this deck because they were a little bit too like main deck equipment focused, whereas we really kind of needed some hyper specific creating our own tokens. We needed this deck to be a little bit more self-sufficient, and so Cauldron Complete is more of like a win con. It's more, and it does have living weapon, so it is in that category. It does fit into what we need the deck to do, where it's creating its own body to be put on, and then gives us first strike, trample, indestructible, haste, 5/5, and whenever it deals combat damage to a creature, exile that creature. So at the bare minimum, we're probably never using Temmet's ability on Cauldron Complete. It's just another body to swing with, and it's a little bit of removal. It does some damage. It's indestructible. It's a nice body, and push come to shove, if we do need to re-equip it onto something to swing for lethal, it does have some pretty decent abilities. Okay, so those are the pump. That's the pump category. Oh, one thing I want to note beforehand: Flare Husk. Let's just real quick look at living weapon. When this equipment enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 black germ creature token, then attach it to it. This is important because if you ever unequip Flare Husk to re-equip it to something else, you lose the body. So that's why Mirrodin is pretty good. It has, 2/2. It's got 2 toughness, whereas Flare Husk, without the +1/+1, the equipment provides, your germ creatures lose the toughness they need to stay on the battlefield. So, that's probably the biggest weakness of the deck, is whenever you try and move stuff like this off, you lose the body. So, kind of an innate thing to build around and think about once we have to make the decision of, okay, what are we swinging with? Okay, real quick, I'm just going to cover board wipes because it's this next category just right next to the commander. So I included Sunfall in this deck, and this was because exiling all creatures, we're not going that wide with this deck. We're going a little bit wider than I think we usually would, just in an equipment strategy, but we're not going that wide. And Incubate X, where X is the number of creatures exiled this way, we create 1 token. So you pay 2, it turns into, let's say we exile like 15 creatures. We have a 15/15 Phyrexian creature token if you pay 2. So Sunfall, I think, is really good and should probably go in like the win condition category here, or sorry, the equipment target. Of course, it's a board wipe, so I just want to leave it here. It should really go into the equipment target, because what we're doing with Sunfall is wiping the board to create a big body that we can then switch all of our equipment onto. Leaving it in board wipe, though, just because it's such a relevant category. Some of the things you'll see in these other side categories, like equipment target and win condition, fit into categories like draw and ramp. I just included them here because I wanted to be specific about why I included some of these cards in the deck. I wanted to pay special attention to them. Hour of Reckoning is great because it destroys all non-token creatures. We have very few non-token creatures in the deck. Looking real quick at copy. So Masterwork of Ingenuity is kind of a weird card in the deck. I didn't know exactly where to put it, and so I just left it as the auto category. But what's great about this is it enters the battlefield as a copy of any equipment on the battlefield. So if we have a Cauldron Complete, Masterwork of Ingenuity can copy that, and now you've got 2 of them. So it's just really useful in the deck. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife, but also a total wild card. So it's kind of a fun inclusion that, to be honest, you could cut if you wanted to be a little bit more specific with what you wanted this slot in the deck to do. But you've got 100 cards. I don't think, like, this card is still beneficial in the deck, so I don't think you're gaining too much by min-maxing this. All right, my favorite category is card draw. Esper Sentinel Tuner, I think for obvious reasons, it is kind of an equipment target because as you pump its power, you increase the amount that people have to pay, and generally speaking, people barely pay for the one anyway. So just makes it more expensive, makes it harder for people to pay for that, guarantees your card draw. Also, it's an artifact creature. I included a lot of artifact creatures in this. In terms of cards that aren't, our creature tokens, I think every other creature or nearly every other creature in the deck is an artifact creature because we have cards in the deck that care about artifacts. So Glimmer Lens is another 4 Mirrodin. It's one of the better equipments in terms of utility. Just gives us card draw. Mask of Memory, artifact equipment. Whenever it deals damage, you draw 2. Of course, this is with a little bit of looting here, where you have to discard a card as part of it. But drawing 2 and discarding a card when white's pretty good at equipment recursion, not a bad thing. Pure Steel Paladin. I cannot believe this card is only $2 now. It's just really good card draw, and it lets us move equipment whenever we need to, as long as we have the requisite number of equipments on the battlefield. So Pure Steel Paladin, if you're building an equipment deck and it has white, which nearly every equipment deck does, Pure Steel Paladin is really good. SRAM Senior Edificer. Whenever you cast them, you draw a card. Staff of the Storyteller. This is kind of a weird one. It creates that body that we want. It doesn't equip itself to it. This is more of like an enchantment almost. But you can tap it once you create creature tokens. Pay a white, tap it, remove this counter that's put on by the creature token, and then draw a card. It's a decent card draw. It is an artifact. We care about artifacts in the deck. Staggering Insight is pretty great. It's an enchantment. It's one of the few enchantments in the deck, but gives lifelink, and then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, which we're going to be doing quite a bit with Temmet's ability, draw a card. Armored Sky Hunter. I love these Cat Knight cards just in general. I have kind of a pet one in my Rin and Seri deck. So this is like a bit of digging for card draw. But rather than drawing the card, it just goes directly onto the battlefield, which is the reason this card is $5 and not 65 cents. So if an equipment is put onto the battlefield this way, you can automatically attach it to a creature you control. This is a really good card. I mean, it's got flying, so it's easy to attack with. It's only 4 mana. Really, really, really good card. Curiosity Crafter is one of the 2 no maximum hand size cards in the deck. And then whenever you a creature token you control deals damage to a player, which we're going to be doing a lot, draw a card. Finally, the last card draw, and this is also protection. Artifacts you control have hexproof. Remember when I said that there's a lot of artifact cards in this deck? And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control the artifact with the highest mana value or are tied for the highest mana value, draw a card. Not a whole lot of people run artifacts that cost more than 2, sometimes 3, oftentimes 3. So, if you have a Batter Skull on the battlefield, which you want to have, like, this is one of the better, self-sufficient living weapon cards. 5 mana is usually enough to draw that card that you're looking for from Padim. So, Padim's pretty great, and he gives you hexproof. So, kind of 2 for 1. Next, I'm going to talk about Ramp, because I want to save these categories for a little bit later. So, Ramp, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet. These are no-brainers. You're playing Commander. You're going to play Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. I had the Talisman and the Azorious Signet in this deck, and then I just felt like I didn't need it. Like, yes, they're artifacts, but there are equipments that give the ramp we're looking for, and because so much of what we're doing is artifact specific, I wanted something like the Ethereum Sculptors of the world, where artifact spells cost 1 less to cast, just reducing the costs versus flat mana. I feel like because we're running so many artifacts, I'll get to the actual number at the end here of how many artifacts are in the deck, but this pays off much faster than a talisman giving you one colorless mana does. Dowsing Dagger. I love these Ixalan flip cards, the two-faced cards. So ETBs, someone else, just one opponent creates 2/0/2 creature tokens with Defender. The equipped creature gets +2/+1. And then whenever you deal combat damage to a player, you transform Dowsing Dagger. So you equip this to one of your creature tokens, and then it becomes Lost Veil. Add 3 mana of any one color to mana pool. Just super simple. It's a land, so really hard for removal. And it's 3 mana. This card, I think this card is really cool and really fun, so I included it because it's an equipment and it's ramp. That's what we wanted this category to be. So, Ethereum Sculptor, I already covered this one. Sword of the Animist. To be honest, I did not include as many or even all of the swords that I probably should have, but I included the big 2, which are Sword of the Animist and Sword of Feast and Famine, just for ramp. I was just caring about ramp when it came to these 2. You probably can and should put in the other swords that matter. I just really was only focused on these 2. Bitterthorn, this is Animus, might be my favorite card in the deck. So it's a 3 mana living weapon, and the equipped creature gets +1/+1. So whenever that creature attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Super basic ramp, but when this comes in for 3 mana, and that equipped creature is a living weapon, is this Phyrexian Germ creature token, Temmet is going to pump that, and you're basically, every turn, if that's the only... if this is the only thing you're attacking with, and that's what you're pumping with Temmet, you're getting an extra land every turn. And you're not in green. So this is pretty sweet. So Foundry Inspector is basically Ethereum Sculptor. Just 1 extra mana, but it's colorless. We're going to talk about Feast and Famine. You just untap all your lands. You basically get a second upkeep. Or untap phase. And then Master Transmuter is... similar to, but very different from the cost reducers up above, where you can pay a blue and tap her to bounce one of your artifacts and just put in another. So the reason this is categorized as ramp is, let's say I have a Soul Ring, and this would actually be really good. I have a Soul Ring, I tap it, have 2 floating, tap an island, use Master Transmuter's ability, and I swap Soul Ring for Cauldron Complete. So Cauldron Complete just comes in for free, for 1 blue mana, basically free, and you just cheat it onto the board. You play Soul Ring again with one of those 2 floating. Boom. This is a really good card for just getting out those more expensive and more inefficient living weapons. So I included it. I think it's really cool, just as kind of an option to cheat stuff out. So for Recursion, one of my favorites from Lord of the Rings is Forge Anew. So when it enters the battlefield, you return an equipment card from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is pretty relevant, just kicking something right to the battlefield rather than to your hand. And as long as it's your turn, you may activate equip abilities anytime as an instant, which is great for shuffling Death Touch onto a blocker. If it's unequipped, you just basically flash it onto someone else. Throw that 1/1 in front of someone's commander that's attacking you, and you get a free snipe. And then you can also pay 0 rather than paying the equip cost of the first equip ability you activate during each of your turns. So something like Cauldron Complete is a great example. It's 7 mana to equip. If it's the first equip you do on your turn, it's free. And then I wanted to include a Planeswalker. So who better than Nahiri? So I did Nahiri the Lithomancer. There's also an Ugin that's pretty good, but I chose Nahiri just because she's kind of the go-to equipment character. So +2 is create a 1/1 white core soldier creature token, and then you can attach an equipment you control to it for free. -2 is you just put an equipment card onto the battlefield for free, either from your hand or the graveyard. And then -10 is you create the equipment artifact token named Stoneforge Blade. It has indestructible, and equipped creature gets +5/+5 and double strike with equip 0. So you're gonna aim to get this whenever you can. So you're just constantly upticking 2 until you're at 11. You hit -10, and then you try and keep Nahiri alive just to keep making these soldier creature tokens. It's a little bit of an engine. And she's a bit of a toolbox just in any equipment deck. She's pretty good and very cheap. So I'll take someone that has basically no downsides as a Planeswalker for 80 cents. That's value to me. Okay, Let's talk about removal. So we're in white and white and blue. So these first 4 or 5, let's see, first 5 are super classic. Offer You Can't Refuse, Path to Exile, Swan Song, Swords to Plowshares, and Arcane Denial. Very normal to include in any, if you're in white, you have Path to Exile, you have Swords to Plowshares. If you're in blue, you're generally doing Offer You Can't Refuse, Swan Song, Arcane Denial, and Counterspell. We're in both white and blue, so I included Dovin's Veto, and then Citizen's Crowbar is, with New Capenna, there was the Citizens kind of archetype, and so this makes a creature token that we can use. But the equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has pay white and tap it, sacrifice Citizen's Crowbar to destroy artifact and enchantment. So it gives us some artifact and enchantment removal. White and green. This is generally a white and green effect, but the equipment itself is really not that useful just for the +1/+1. It's more of a removal option. And I do actually have 12 removal, just like real quick to note. There are 10 ramp, and there are a couple more than 10 card draw. They're just split into some of these side categories. So I do have like a more optimal spread of kind of my vegetables within the deck, but I just broke them out so that it was a little more obvious in terms of, again, like I said before, some of the cards I wanted to call special attention to. So last bits of removal, I love Lion Sash. It's not even that great of like an answer for graveyard decks, but it does kind of slow them down, and also really quickly can turn into a problem, turn by turn. It's +1/+1 per turn, but hey, turn 3 you can pay as many white mana as you want, and this pumps. So it's very easy to get like +6/+6 in a turn, and then you're swinging with your target creature token. That's unblockable because of Temmet. So Lion Sash is great. Generous Gift, again, a pretty classic white removal spell. Now Stroke of Midnight is better. I kind of just autopiloted and put Generous Gift. It's still a pretty good card. Just Stroke of Midnight's better. And then Argentum Armor. To be honest, this card feels like it's bait. It's a 6 mana 6 that doesn't come with a creature, so you have to pay 12 mana. But you're destroying target permanents, and we have a lot of ways to cheat this onto creatures. So I threw it in there. I think it's a really mean card, just in terms of destroying permanents means you can destroy lands. But sometimes you got to keep people honest. So Argentum Armor is here as like a scary throwdown. Okay, real quick, going through lands. Basically, my mindset here was I did a pretty solid land base, $177. I tried to avoid as many tap lands as I could for the dual lands. I did include several artifact lands, like Darksteel Citadel being one. I did not include very many utility lands. Iganjo and Otawara are 2 of, I think, the 3, with Rogue's Passage being another. So I did not include very many utility lands. Adventurous Fair is another. If I wanted to go a little bit harder kind of on this land base and just include a little bit more utility, which would be useful, I would add a couple more utility lands, but I just wasn't. I didn't really care about how we could eke out a little bit more value in the land base. Just we're so focused on getting equipments onto the battlefield that I just didn't think that there was a ton of lands that could be useful. If you know of lands that really care about equipment decks or artifact decks that would be useful to throw in there, drop it in the comments. I've built equipment decks, but I've never built them and then actually played them. As far as Commander goes, I don't have an equipment deck, so this was a little bit of a different thought experiment for me. Jumping into the equipment target. So I called this category this because I wanted to give the deck kind of a win con that was not just an inherent like push this button win. But I wanted to give, rather than having these 0/0 germ tokens, what if we had a 10/10 token that we have to focus some of our equipments onto and pile on and turn this into a 30/30 or something. So Idol of Oblivion is great. This is another piece of card draw, obviously. Draw a card, activate only if you create a token this turn. We're creating a decent number of tokens, so Idol of Oblivion is pretty great. And actually, I try to put this card in like a lot of my decks, because I make a lot of token decks. This is, I think, the first one that it actually made the cut for the top 100 cards that like stay in the deck. So I really like this card just conceptually. I think it's really cool, and it gives us a really good target for our equipment. Phyrexian Processor was another one of those cards that I was looking at. Let me move my cursor. That I was looking at while building, and I was like, I really like this card conceptually. I like what it offers and the decision that you get to make based on how much value you want to get from it. So for 4 mana, you know, it comes and it enters the battlefield, and then you pay life. There's a decent amount of life gain in this deck, so you can be a little bit crazy with how much life you're willing to pay. And then pay 4 and tap it, which is pretty steep, but you get that XX equal to the amount of life you paid. I think it's a really unique like cost payoff card where it can do as much work as you're willing to let it, and it fit into this category of equipment target. You know, that's what this is here to do. Also, if like you get board wiped and you're kind of struggling to get, you know, some of these living weapon cards out from your hand, but they're already on the battlefield, cards like Phyrexian Processor give you targets regardless of how strong the minion is. So I really like this in the deck. And then Thousand Moon Smithy, again, Ixalan, flip cards, MDFCs. So when it enters the battlefield, you create a white gnome soldier artifact creature token. Again, creature token is what we care about because of Temmet's ability, where its power and toughness are equal to the number of artifacts and or creatures you control. So we're going to have a decent number of creatures. We're going to have a lot of artifacts. These gnomes will go crazy. So at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you may tap 5 untapped artifacts and or creatures you control, which to my understanding, you can tap your equipments and they're still equipped. So you just can tap your equipment, tap 5 equipments, and you transform Thousand Moon Smithy. Whenever you cast an artifact, so that now whenever you cast an artifact or creature, you do the same thing. You make a gnome soldier artifact creature token with power and toughness equal to equipments and artifacts. Super strong. This is much more efficient in like a true artifact deck, but this is pretty close to a true artifact deck, and I think is just another opportunity for you to win the game. You almost don't even need to equip this card. You just use Temmet's ability on a 2020 gnome soldier creature token, and it's gonna start ruining people's day. So Barracks to 1,000 and then Thousand Moon Smithy, I think, sleeper pick for the best card in the deck. It wouldn't be an equipment card, and we wouldn't be talking about best cards in the deck unless you mentioned Stoneforge Mystic. So whenever it ETBs, you tutor for an equipment card, and then you can also pay 2, tap her, put that card or any equipment card from your hand onto the battlefield. So $25. Stoneforge Mystic's really good. The only reason you wouldn't include this in an equipment deck is she's too expensive for a single card. And then Stone Hewer Giant. There's a couple other tutor options that you could run. Generally speaking, I don't run tutors, but in an equipment deck, I felt like it was just a little bit needed, especially because our commander is just not doing much. So Stone Hewer Giant, pay 2 and tap it. Tutor. Really good. It's actually a tutor straight to the battlefield too, which is why he's $4.50 instead of $1. But yeah, turn by turn tutor and put it onto the battlefield. It's really good. Granted, it's 5 mana, but really good card. The last category I wanted to talk about are my win conditions. So these are cards that, because we're in Azorious, it's a little bit harder to win the game flat out. And so these aren't like a straight up like push this button and win, but they're the closest I could get. So first off is Arden. The reason Arden is a win condition is you throw all of your equipments on one thing and just kill someone. You just nuke them. Seems good. It'd be great if like you rule 0 this is a partner, but I wouldn't let someone do that if I was playing against this deck specifically. Fire Shrieker, equipped creature has double strike. We're giving stuff unblockable, so if you give a 10/10 unblockable, that's a huge problem. So double strike kills people. Nettle Cyst is a living weapon, but it gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment you control. Very similar to our gnomes up here from Thousand Moon Smithy. Nettle Cyst, I know in many decks can go infinite because you're generating like infinite treasures. That's not why it's here. It's an honest Nettle Cyst, but because we're creating so many artifacts and playing so many artifacts, it's very easy to pump someone with Nettle Cyst. And then Halvar, I love Kaldheim just as a set. I don't have really too many cards from the set, so I wanted to include Halvar. You are basically never using Sword of the Realms. Whenever a equipped creature dies, return it to its owner's hand, because the stuff you're equipping this to are tokens. So that's useless. You want to keep Halvar out because it gives creatures you control that are enchanted or equipped double strike. So now you're no longer worried too much about having Temmet's ability once the game goes on, because you're just going to start swinging with everything, and you'll give your biggest guy or even your smallest guy unblockable, so that they're double striking, and then you've got some tramplers, and you have multiple ways to kind of end the game with Halvar. Just an across the board double strike is wild in this deck. That's why it's $15. And at the beginning of each combat, you can attach aura or equipment for free to attach one aura or equipment for free. So it helps you move stuff around. It lets you stay flexible. And then Kemba's Banner is in the last slot, and it's 4 Mirrodin. It's only 3 mana to re-equip it as well, so you can kind of bounce this around pretty easily. But equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. This is not a go wide deck. I've said that before, but you are building a wider board just naturally, just so you can pump your own stuff, and you're building a wider board with your living weapon stuff, so that eventually you can move them off onto something like our Idol of Oblivion's Eldrazi token. So it's more of like a mid game. This is how you're going to start like really doing damage to people and put them in a position for lethal. So Kemba's Banner, I think, is really good for that, and it just works again for our 4 Mirrodin, and it creates a threat that our living weapons don't really have, where this is just sitting here as a 2/4. It's nothing more, nothing less. 2/4 with reach. Kemba's Banner actually accrues value the more cards you play and the more creatures you have. So with something like a Thousand Moon Smithy that turns into Barracks of the Thousand, you're producing multiple creature tokens and artifacts. So Kemba's is just gonna keep getting pumped. That is my Temmet Vizier of Naktamun deck in a nutshell. Let's see, that took me about 45 minutes to record through all that, so I hope I got all the information across that I was trying to convey. I hope you liked the deck. I think it was actually a really cool thought experiment, just in terms of trying to figure out, basically in an hour, what does this deck want to do? What does it want to do best? Because when you look at Azorious, it's like predisposition to being a tokens deck. But if you look a little bit deeper, it's like, okay, there's a better strategy here. And I think that is kind of what I'm aiming to do with this series. It is maybe look a little bit deeper than the face value. Here's what the most obvious strategy for a commander is, and really kind of flex some of that deck building, because I think it's a lot of fun, and it creates interesting opportunities like this, where I would probably never build an Azorious equipment deck with this commander. So let me know what you think. I really enjoyed building the deck, and I hope you had fun too. Peace.